Emmanuel Macron is about to make his big speech on Europe. We can cross live to him now. Let's listen to him.
Mesdames les premières ministres,
Prime Ministers,
Monsieur le Commissaire européen,
European Commissioner,
Messieurs les parlementaires,
Members of Parliament,
Mesdames et Messieurs les députés européens,
European
Monsieur le Procureur général,
Members of Parliament,
Monsieur le Chef d'état-major des armées, Monsieur le
Head
Préfet
of
de
the
région,
Army,
Madame la Maire,
Prefects of
Monsieur le
different
Recteur,
regions, Mayor,
Mesdames et Messieurs les
Vice
ambassadrices et
Chancellor,
ambassadeurs, Mesdames et
Ambassadors,
Messieurs en vos grades et qualités.
ladies and gentlemen,
7 ans après le discours de la
7
Sorbonne,
years after
je souhaitais
the
venir ici, dans ce même
speech
lieu,
at the Sorbonne, I wanted to come back to this same place so we could speak about what we have accomplished and to speak about our future, our European future, but by its very definition, the future of France. These are two things that cannot be separated. In 2017, I said that our Europe often couldn't find solutions, maybe because of a certain lassitude or complacency. And that was why it was often attacked. Therefore, we want to create a more united, sovereign, democratic Europe, more united so that we can face up to other challenges from elsewhere, make sure that we do not have other lifestyles and values imposed upon us. Indeed, liberal democracy is born here in Europe, and this is a place where people decide things for themselves. So, I said that 7 years ago, and here we are. But we have not achieved everything we wanted to achieve. And we must be lucid about this. If we wanted our Europe to become more democratic, we can say that we haven't made as much progress as we might have wanted to. Maybe there have been changes to some of our treaties and rules and different innovations in these areas, and there have been many reflections on all of this, but we haven't necessarily made the progress that we should have in this area. However, we have made some progress when it comes to becoming more united and more sovereign. Europe has faced many crises, unprecedented crises. Brexit, of course. And indeed, we can see today that nobody wanting to leave Europe or the euro now. We've also had the war in Ukraine and tragic scenes on a daily basis. And of course, existential risks on our continent. However, despite all of this, and a context that has always seen major changes when it comes to environmental and technological issues, and these are things that completely change the way that we live and the way that we produce, we have been able to move forward. And indeed, there was a concept that 7 years ago may have seemed quite French, this idea of sovereignty. But this is something that has now become a European concept. And despite all of these crises, it's rare to have seen Europe advance so much in such little time. This is the fruit of our work. And this is through certain steps, some historic steps that I believe that we have taken. First of all, financial unity in order to overcome the COVID pandemic. This was not a given, and even before COVID arrived. When we spoke about this beforehand, many people said, this is a great French idea, but it will never be, and it will never be a reality. We were able to set up a Franco-German solution very soon after the pandemic broke out, and we were able to free up billions of euros to fight against COVID. Indeed, Scholz, who was the financial minister, now has become Chancellor, spoke about how difficult this was going to be. However, this was a European choice. And we've seen this in all of our different regions, in all of our different towns. We've seen the direct consequences. We have been able to put forward solutions for all kinds of companies of all sizes, big and small. The second major choice was that of strategic unity when it comes to certain issues that before that were solely national issues. health, for example. Commissioner Breton is here, and he may remember setting up this policy that wasn't actually foreseen in any of our texts, producing European vaccines, making sure that we have enough supplies and that we can redistribute them all over Europe. This is something that we did. And if we were able to vaccine people from the start of 2021, it was because of this European policy. And this was something that wasn't even foreseen in the texts of the European Union. We were able to produce vaccines on French soil, and this is also due to European unity. When it comes to energy as well, who would have thought we would have been able to move away from our dependence on Russian hydrocarbons? And also when it comes to defense. In the first days of the war in Ukraine, we were able to take actions at the very beginning of that particular combat. We have been able to have greater technological and industrial sovereignty. There is no other area in the world other than Europe that would believe that it needed to depend on anyone else but itself. And in 2018, we set up a partnership with Germany to support our battery sectors. We have also, alongside Germany, been able to set up the Tank of the Future initiative and combat systems for the future, and also when it comes to submarines as well. However, as soon as the pandemic broke out, and from the very first weeks of the war in Ukraine, during the Versailles summit, we were able to set up a real strategy, an autonomous strategy. And this was a choice to stop having certain other dependencies in certain sectors, such as when it comes to semiconductors. A policy was put in place, investments were made, and we were able to reshore companies. Something that we hadn't seen before that in certain sectors. We can accuse Europe of a certain naivety beforehand when it comes to technology. And we were able to change some of our commercial practices. And we are only, let's say, halfway along this particular objective. A fourth issue is that we were able to think about and plan for some of the major challenges of Europe. We've heard many criticisms of the Green Deal. Excuse my Anglicism there. But Europe is the only political space in the world that was actually prepared for this transition, putting in place directives for the digital sector so that we can actually regulate content and markets, and also put in place a text that allows us to have milestones when it comes to our energy transition, so that we can also foresee our international obligations. So we have actually set up made a transparent choice. And now we need to make sure that all of this can actually be done on the ground in the different countries of Europe. However, we have been able to set up a European schedule for this transition. Elsewhere in the rest of the world, we see that superpowers have taken some actions, but they haven't actually been able to explain how they're going to respect their commitments. So, we can now see these as stable objectives. And I will speak later about how we can make all of this compatible with growth, full employment, and industrial progress. A fifth achievement is that Europe has been able to reaffirm the existence of its borders. Europe is based on free movement of people and of goods. And so, however, sometimes we may have neglected our external borders, not as watertight borders, but let's just say that understanding that these borders need to be taken into account. And there have been some divisions. Over 10 years, we have seen divisions that have stopped us from moving forward in these areas. Indeed, during the French presidency of the European Union, we saw that what has come out of that, a policy on asylum and immigration. And I thank all of those who made that possible. And this is for the first time allowing us to put in place obligatory procedures when it comes to people enter through Europe through our external borders, and showing how we can return people who shouldn't be on our soil to their countries, but also being able to better welcome those who should have access to Europe. And we have been able to think about our neighbour, let's say the European neighbourhood. After the Russian aggression, we see that Moldova and Ukraine have been seen as part of our European family. And we've also been able to send out a strong message to the Western Balkans. Indeed, we are now able to clearly speak to these countries about the kind of reforms that need to be made so they can integrate Europe. And indeed, our union can only actually enlarge if we take necessary reforms also within. So these are actions that have been taken at a European scale. An initiative that was taken in May 2022 goes beyond looking only at the 27 countries of the European Union. We have spoken with the United Kingdom, with Norway, and with countries in the Balkans, so that we can really speak about having concrete cooperation from a geographical point of view. Since 2017, all of this has been possible due to many of you in this room being elected as members of Parliament. I would like to thank all of the different ministers, successive ministers, whose work has helped us, especially during the French presidency in the first half of 2022. To be able to carry these ambitions. Our European members of Parliament who carry out the work of the Parliament and who help feed into the work of the Commission. Indeed, this concept of sovereignty that before perhaps seemed strange for Europe has become a reality. And we've seen this over the last 7 years. We have perhaps done this through different kinds of methods that are perhaps not a method that is the Brussels method, if you allow me. We've been able to expand this to all of the European capitals. And we've also been able to build bridges with Germany, for example, with the Aix-la-Chapelle agreement with Italy, with Spain as well, in Barcelona. And there will be new treaties signed even tomorrow. We have been able to build bridges again with countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And we are trying to work on multiple geographical areas, making sure that together we can move forward.
So this is what we've been doing, and it's a lot over the last few years. Without this progress of the European sovereignty, we might have been behind the progress of history, but we did react. And if we hadn't, the situation would be really dramatic. We had a financial situation where we were divided and we were not sovereign. So it took us 4 or 5 years to sort this out, but within a year we managed, like the United States, and the crises that we've been going through, and we did react quickly and in a united way, means that we are where we are today. But is it enough? Can I really come to you with a very satisfied speech? I am lucid and honest, and the battle is not yet won. At the horizon of the next decade, which we must view, there's an enormous risk of being made fragile and demoted because we're in a world of acceleration of the transformation. My message is simple, as Paul Valéry said after the First World War, that our civilizations were mortal and that we had to be lucid. Well, Europe is mortal. It can die, and it only depends on our choices. These choices have to be made now. And it's today that peace and war are choices, because we need a security, we need big changes. We have artificial intelligence, we have decarbonization, we have lots of crucial themes where we have to decide now and decide whether Europe is going to be an innovative research continent or not. The attacks against liberal democracies, against our values, and I'm saying this in this particular forum of knowledge, it's the top of the cream of European civilization, with the notions of liberty, justice, and it's now that it's at stake. We are at a point of divide where we know that Europe is mortal, and it depends upon us. And to explain how serious the matter is, first, we don't have the proper weapons against the risks. In spite of everything I did and we did, and that I've mentioned, we have a lot at stake. We've woken up. We've doubled our defense budgets. France has, with the second programming law, but this awakening is still rather slow. There's an acceleration in the world. There's the Chinese-American tension, which led to an escalation of technological innovation and armament budgets. We have regional powers that are increasing their action and their power. Iran, Russia, and Europe is in a situation of being cornered on all its borders, and we're reacting too slowly, facing the reality of all those movements in a context where, whichever way you look at it, the United States have two priorities: themselves, that's fair enough, and the Chinese matter, secondly. And Europe is far behind. It's not a priority for their geopolitical view. However strong our alliance is, and however they are committed on the Ukrainian front. So we used to buy from Russia, from China, and delegate our security to the States. Well, this is over. There are deep changes, and we need to move to a different scale, because the rules have changed, the facts have changed. War is on the European territory, and it's carried out by someone who has the nuclear power. Iran is about to have nuclear power, and that's also a big game changer. Second change, economically, our model is no longer viable. We want to have everything, but it's not possible. We want to have a good social model, and we have the best regime for solidarity in the world. We want a decarbonated climate, but we're the only territory who took some rules in order to reach decarbonation. We want a trade system which is good for us, and but there are other people who are changing the rules of the game. There's subsidies in China, in the States. We can't have high environmental and social standards, invest less than our competitors, and have naive commercial policies and hope hope that all this will go on. It won't. The risk is that Europe drops behind, and this risk is already starting to be visible. In spite of all our efforts, the GDP has increased between 73 and now by 60%, whereas us only 22%. And this is before they decided to implement the Reduction Act and start subsidizing their industries. Whereas we're working on our green technologies. So we have this challenge. We have to revise our model because the rules of the game have changed, and they've changed a lot because the first two leading powers have decided that they're not going to follow the rules of international trade anymore. And that's very simple. For 20 years, we believed, okay, let's take China into the World Trade Organization, and they'll follow the same rules. We don't follow them. It's like if the first world economy had suddenly decided to just shed all those rules. And so we can't hold our objectives. And the risk is, of course, that we get poorer, and that would be really terrible for the continent which has the best social model, therefore the most expensive. And the result is that we are at a dramatic moment. We have battles of values which are more and more difficult to understand and to lead. For a long time, we thought our model was the best. Democracy, human rights, soft power in Europe that rules it all. But the model, even if it's attractive, is losing a lot of its weight. And our liberal democracy is undermined by criticism, and we are vulnerable. Everywhere in Europe, our values, our cultures are threatened because the very basis of these models are challenged. There's authoritarian models that are more attractive. There's other views, and everywhere where we see our children and adolescents being influenced by the American or the Asian models. I'll get back to some of these models. Our Europe is therefore more and more challenged. Its attractives is no longer obvious, and its power is also lesser. It can't write history anymore, and it's following history as written elsewhere. So we have a geopolitical view, there's the cultural views, which lead us to reconsider the question of sovereignty and put it more on the forefront. But what is sovereignty? When I told you before Europe could die, we have to respond to those challenges of history, and the solution is in our ability to react and to realize that the rules of the game are totally different now, and that we need to take massive strategic decisions and accept the change of paradigms, and underneath to think in terms of power, humanity, and prosperity. And I think those are three leading ideas which would give content to the European idea, to the principles, to make Europe something that's not going to disappear. We need a political project. in a world that is more and more threatened. So let's start with power. A powerful Europe is a Europe that would be respected, that can guarantee its own security, that has borders, that it protects, that knows about the risks which it's exposed to, and is getting ready against this risk. So for that, we need to forget about being a strategic minority state. Before, implicitly, we were conceived in that way. There are a lot of European countries who had accepted at the end of the Second World War, it was even sometimes imposed to them, to depend on other states for their security. We didn't want some countries to rearm too quickly. So strategically, everything in our world had been delegated. We had delegated our energy to Russia. Our security for several of our European partners depended on the states. And trade was given over to China. And now we have to get all those things back, get a grip on them. And for defense, to start with defense, the main thing is the war in Ukraine. And it's the basic condition for our security is for Russia not to win. It's quite indispensable. That's why we were right from the beginning to sanction Russia and help the Ukrainians, and we should go on doing so. We're lucky that the Americans are on our side for this. And we must try and increase our help. And I totally take my responsibility as concerning the 26th of February, when I introduced a notion of strategic doubt, because we're in a situation where we're not quite sure about the European limits. Why should others continents tell us where our limits are? If Ukraine is the condition of our security, and if in Ukraine it's more than a question of the territorial, the sovereignty of that country, it's a question of the security of Europe. So are we prepared for that? No. We have to become credible, and we have to be present and act as a force of deterrence. And this involves nuclear forces. And the first phase of the geopolitical situation with which Europe has to live now is that. It's a deep change as regards our security. The most recent events, the air defense missiles, the deep attacking weapons, are signs that the adversaries have no inhibitions, and we can see that, and it's a new paradigm. We need a credible sort of defense for the European continent.
Now, of course, the pillar that we are building within NATO, that we are trying to build, that we've been trying to build over these last few years, is absolutely essential. However, we need to make sure that we have credible defence in Europe. That's the condition that needs to exist, so that we can have a credible framework. Europe needs to be able to protect what is dear to it, alongside its allies, anyone who wants to stand by us, or alone if necessary. Do we need to have an anti-missile shield, an anti-missile system, maybe? What will our defence capabilities be? We need to work on how we will defend ourselves. And when we have a neighbouring country that has become aggressive and that seems to have no limits and that has ballistic missiles, it's been innovating a lot when it comes to the technology and the range of these missiles, well, we see that we absolutely have to set up this strategic concept of credible defence in Europe. We have to do it on our own. That's why, in the coming months, I invite all of our stakeholders to build this European defence system. And then we need to actually look at the pertinence, anti-missiles, the range of our missiles, etc. We need to be able to have the most. We have an army that is perhaps the biggest, the most efficient, and that has nuclear capabilities. We know that nuclear defence is something that is absolutely vital for France and therefore vital for Europe too. It's thanks to this credible defence system that we will be able to actually have security guarantees that all of our partners are expecting. And this will also help us to set up a common security framework. And this will help us in the future to build strong ties later with countries neighbouring Russia. So this is a real paradigm shift for Europe. We have to create between the different European armies a real common strategy. Therefore, we need to move forward with the European Intervention Initiative that I proposed in 2017. We have many members that joined this initiative. We'll be able to set up different operations in the Sahel, for example, with the task force that we had there. And this was the framework that allowed us to actually take unprecedented actions in the Red Sea area. Therefore, in order to build these kinds of coalitions, we need to have a common culture. That's why we need to have a regional European defence framework in the Mediterranean, for example, even in the Arctic. But we also need to set up a military academy, a European military academy, so that we can train future members of our military services. When we are setting our strategic compass, we need to make sure that we can have a rapid response force so that we can mobilize up to 5,000 soldiers to help in regions where Europeans may be under threat. We have to invest in new areas where conflicts may arise. We see that Russia is waging a hybrid war. We have to protect our infrastructures, transport systems, hospital systems, telecommunication systems, electricity systems. We also need to make sure that we have a strong cybersecurity and cyber defense system in Europe. And while trying to modernize our own armies and modernizing our armies, it's a perfect opportunity to pool our efforts so we can have a common strategy. So, a paradigm shift. Concrete initiatives set up together. We already have frameworks for this. We have unprecedented partnerships. The British, who are natural allies, and we have treaties through Lancaster House, and these give us a solid foundations for partnerships. But we have to strengthen this, because Brexit hasn't affected this partnership, and perhaps why not enlarge these partnerships to others? And the political community in Europe is surely the best place for building this new defence system and approach. We need to make sure that we can build this common security framework. However, we can't speak about defence without the defence industry. We have to transform the kind of just-in-time emergency measures set up for Ukraine into something more long-term. Now, of course, the road will be long because we are suffering from decades of underinvestment in this area. And we need to make sure that the dividends of, in fact, the dividends of peace
Ce qui a aussi créé une très forte dépendance à l'égard de
perhaps
l'industrie
meant that we have not invested in this area when we should have, and that's why we depend so heavily on external
On doit produire
actors.
davantage,
So we need to make sure that we produce ourselves. We need to produce more here
C'est
in
fondamental,
Europe.
là aussi.
It's absolutely fundamental.
C'est pourquoi j'assume le fait qu'il nous faut
That's
une
why
préférence européenne
I believe
dans
and
l'achat
reiterate
matériel militaire.
that we need
Regardez la
to
facilité
make sure that
européenne
there are
que nous avons
European,
bâtie
for example, European
pour les débuts de la
tanks.
guerre.
There's a European tank project.
Les 3/4 ont été utilisés pour acheter du matériel non européen. Alors,
Now
dans
you
ce
see
cas
that our
d'urgence, vous ne
defence
savez pas
budget,
tout produire en
75% of it has actually been
des
used to
réflexes sont
buy
établis.
material that comes from outside of
souvent
Europe.
américains, parfois coréens.
We believe it's better to buy American or buy Korean. But how are we going to be able to have our common defence system if we don't actually produce weapons and the materials that we need for defence here in Europe? So we need to make sure that there's a European preference. We need to make sure that we can have European industries in this area. We need the support of the European Investment Bank. And we need more financing and innovative ideas like the European footprint as put forward as a solution. We need to be able to produce more quickly, we need to produce more, or it needs to be European. Now, if we have a strong defensive system, that's going to be a wonderful opportunity for us. What we've been doing in recent years, for example, with some of our fighter jets. Who would have thought 7 years ago that this Rafale fighter jet would be at the very heart of Europe's defence? So we need to also make sure that we develop common standards here in Europe. Because one of the issues is that we are still very divided when it comes to our industries in this area. Fragmentation is a weakness for us. We've seen this during this war, even between Europeans. We understood that our missiles varied too much. Our firepower in general varied largely from one country to another. So we need to make sure that there's a certain standardization of our materials and making sure that there is a real industrial policy when it comes to defence. This is something that is absolutely vital. You will have understood that it's not just about moving on to a new step, but really a paradigm shift when it comes to defence, when it comes to strategies, when it comes to a new common framework. However, this strong Europe when it comes to defence will also depend on diplomacy. And all member states can add their brick to that particular wall. We need to make sure that there is greater European consistency and coherence, and cohesion, rather. We need to complement, use this as a complement to our defensive ambitions. We need to make sure that we can build partnerships with third countries. That is to say, building a Europe that can show that it's never going to be, let's say, the lapdog of the United States, and know how to speak with all of the other regions of the world, emerging regions, Africa, Latin America, not only with trade relations, but also with real reciprocal partnerships. This is what we wanted to do in the first half of 2022, with an Africa summit, and also with the Pacific region as well. We want to be a region that speaks to the rest of the world, and we do not want to find ourselves in these bipolar tensions that we see too much in other areas. Building bridges with Africa and with Latin America shows that Europe is not just a little corner of the West, but it's a continent that thinks about its place in the world. We refuse confrontations between different continents, and we want to build bridges with other continents. It's absolutely key when it comes to education, health, climate change, fighting against poverty. We have to be able to speak with one voice, like we did with the Pact for the People and the Planet, and to show that there are never double standards in Europe. and to show that even there we are autonomous. Powerful Europe is also a Europe that can look after its own borders. I spoke about the Asylum and Immigration Pact, which is a major step forward. However, we all know that this question of immigration and borders is something that shakes all of our countries. It's even more important for France, because France, and I'm sorry for using this technical term, it is a country of secondary movement, let's say. That is to say that the immigrants do not arrive perhaps directly in France, but they transit through other countries to arrive to France. So France, perhaps more than others, needs to have good cooperation and good policies, because immigration starts at the borders of Europe and not just at the borders of France. We are a country where men, women come to our country because they are escaping misery and tragedy. Sometimes they are at the hands or at the mercy of people traffickers. Sometimes they are freedom fighters, but they enter Europe through Greece, through Spain, through the Balkans. And so here, perhaps here more than anywhere else, we need to have strong cooperation. That is why, after this pact, we have to implement it. For example, registering and monitoring immigrants, and if need be, deporting illegal immigrants. These are all things that need to be taken into account for all of the men and women who arrive in our continent, but illegitimately. We need a European response and real coordination. Therefore, we will need to work more with countries of origin and transit countries. And we need to fight relentlessly against people traffickers and their networks. Indeed, it's within this Schengen area that we need to build these policies. I'm not speaking about a naive policy here. We can't ignore the ineffectiveness of some of our policies today. But I also do not believe in this model that some people want to put in place, which means that you go and look for a third country, for example in Africa, and send our immigrants there. This is a betrayal of our values, and it will just lead us down the path of new dependencies on other third countries. We need to make sure that we can condition our visas and our preferences with, when it comes to third countries, and to make sure we work with them. But the problem is that today we still have divisions on this. When it comes to deporting illegal immigrants, that needs to be something that is very clear when it comes to our immigration policies and our visa policies. We also need new operational partnerships so that we can fight against migrant trafficking, people trafficking. Frontex, we know, has 10,000 members, but we need to go even further than that. I continue to believe in Frontex and these border services, even despite some of the criticisms launched at them sometimes.
To protect its citizens, Europe must also fight against networks which go beyond any border. And this has to be consistent within Europe. It's not just immigration. There's terrorism, there's organized crime, there's drugs, there's hate online. There are many topics where we need to act with a more European manner. And I think Schengen has to be much stronger. We need a real Security Council within our borders. For Euro, we have a common good, and we managed to build a political form that was decided intergovernmentally and became credible. So why can't we do it for our borders? It's also a common good, and if all countries were to decide to go that way on immigration, on fighting terrorism and organized crime and cybercriminality, we need to take the decisions together. We need a much more efficient form of governance. governance in the framework of Schengen. We need to go further in the exchange of information, to have exchanges about movements of terrorists, about radicalization. We need a real policy about terrorist content being removed, hate speeches to be removed from the platforms. And for the time being, the platforms don't fulfill their promises. We need to do this at European level, and that's the way we'll be able to have an efficient policy against organized crime and drugs. And today, the most exposed countries are those that have big harbors and are an entry point, and some of them thought that being liberal was the best solution, but it hasn't worked that way. We need a European approach to these topics. You have understood me. The Europe of power is for defense, for protection of our borders. It needs a basic change of our approaches if we want to resist the new world of violence, of disinhibition. We need to adapt, and we need some better strategic concepts and more means. We need to rebuild Europe, a strong Europe. Second key element to answer the questions is that of prosperity. And if we want to be sovereign, we need to build a new model which will involve growth and production. You don't have any powerful organization which doesn't have resources and an economic model. There's no social model just on its own if you haven't got the money to fuel the systems. We are in a world of free, of liberal trade. The rules were different. We thought we had an unlimited supply of raw materials. Climate change was not something we thought of. There were rules which were easier to follow. But recently, and in a few years, everything changed. Raw materials are scarce. Energy as well. Fossil fuels, of course. We are a dependent country to the United States or others. We need critical substances, and China has already started securing its resources, its sources. So the rules are changing completely. We have clear objectives. We want to produce more riches, more wealth, to improve our level of life. We want everybody to have a job. All our citizens want to live better. We want to decarbonate our economy and maintain biodiversity and the climate, protect the climate. We want to protect our strategic production chains. We want to keep an open economy because we want to go on being the big economic power that we are. So those are clear objectives, but we're not anywhere near them. And with the way we are operating now, we'll never make it. We'll never reach those objectives because we are off course compared to the way the world is going. We have too much regulation, not enough investment, we're too open, and we don't defend ourselves. That's the reality. So we need to build a new form of progress towards growth and prosperity. We have policies for competition, for trade, for budgets, but they're not going to cut it. We need a simple adjustment. It's very simple. We're going to lose the race. And I can see the different courses on which Europe and the United States are. The real question is, where are the green technologies? Where are the IA capacities? In the 5 to 10 next years, things are going to be crucial, and we're at a turning point in history. We need to stop over-regulation, increase our investment, change our rules, and better protect our interests. Those are our objectives. And this prosperity pact is what we need to build. There are some basic bricks for this building. First, we have to produce more and greener, and a decarbonated production is a great opportunity for our industries in Europe. It's already started happening with semiconductors, hydrogen. We've rebuilt some sectors of the industry. So it doesn't mean to say that growth is the opposite of decarbonation. If we manage to get on board on the new areas of investment, it isn't. We are almost capable of supplying all our batteries that we need in Europe, and by 2050 we will have achieved that. We are good in semiconductors, and the results for the job situation between Dunkirk and Voss in the south, we've managed to reduce our dependency, and reindustrialization with green objectives is something we can do. And that way we will be the least polluting continent. We'll reach the point of zero plastic and decarbonation if we go that way. But we need another condition, which is deregulation, less regulations, and simplification. This is we had 27 systems of rules before. Now we've got one in certain areas, and Nicoletta has suggested to keep going and offer this simplification to our companies. In favor of that, we can certainly follow the path of the single market for other areas and extend it to telecommunications, etc. And we've got to get out of this fragmented system. We have to be more innovative, reduce the transaction costs, have more innovative capability. And that is the transition we are seeking for, and we need a better competition activity to be more competitive. We need to make new investments on the front of the 27, but simplification is not just a question of single market, it's also lifting some of the rules which create borders between our 27 countries. There are some our domestic market and our 450 million consumers is a great asset compared to the States, but we need to develop it. We need to stop the complication of Europe. We've built good regulations. It gave us some milestones, but we also sometimes went a bit too far in the level of detail. Sometimes we stopped some of the economic actors to work long term. We must be courageous and lighten some of the complications for our small and medium-sized businesses. We have to take into account their constraints. When we create new standards, take their concerns into account. We must make things more proportional, and have big ambitions, and also more trust and less tax, and also revise our point of view on subsidiarity. That means give countries a given flexibility. And in the next few years, we hope to have several waves of simplification, and it doesn't mean to say we drop our large ambitions, but we can simplify the implementation and better accompany our economic partners. We also need acceleration of the industrial policy. This was industrial policy was not a word one wanted to use 7 years ago, but now we're coming back to this concept because it's the possibility of producing anywhere on the European territory. And it means not be internally competitive, but work together, because the cohesion policy didn't even compensate the imbalances which the competition had brought around. So an industrial policy is important for our prosperity, and it's important for the development of the European territories. We have since Prague 2022, when Chancellor Scholz gave a speech, we have the Versailles strategy, which is the Franco-German relationship. And for the industrial policy, we've worked on clean tech and other aims, and we want to have more production, more investment on European territory. We've done it for strategic areas. We want to do it. We did it for semiconductors, for health, where our European policy brought a quick reaction to a need at the moment. Because when we have a shortage of a given drug, it's by acting together that we overcame it, and this is the good way. And we must continue to consolidate the industrial policy. It's a method that has worked. We have to extend it to strategic areas for tomorrow. We don't want to depend on anyone, and we want to become world leaders in 5 emerging sectors. Artificial intelligence, we want to invest massively on the processing capability. We have 3%, us European, we have 3% of the processing capability, but we have a lot to catch up. We want to reach at least 20% in 2030. Quantic data processing, space, Ariane 6 needs to be reinforced. Ariane 6 is the condition of the European access to space. It's absolutely necessary, and beyond the new space and the new manned projects, new technologies, new energies, the new reactors such as fusion. The European Union needs to adopt financial plans for these 5 strategic areas, and for that we need the proper instruments. We need to invest together. We need to design good instruments. We've already got a few, such as the common interest projects, which our industrialists know. They really helped. In 2018 with Germany, we decided to move forward, but we need to synchronize better post-Inflation Reduction Act. It doesn't work with the Chinese investments. We're too slow and too wobbly, and we need to give visibility to our industries. We need to make the deadlines faster. We need to have a simplified mechanism, such as tax breaks, to give our industry 5 to 10 years and to make it, and for rebuilding the key sectors.
We see in sectors such as the medical sector or the chemical sector that we are not fast enough. However, we also need to make sure that we have new rules when it comes to competitiveness. We need to make sure that there is European preference in certain areas such as defence and space, because our competitors already have all of that. They already have it. If there is no more European preference in the nuclear or in the defence sector, then it will never exist. Have you seen the Americans coming in and funding our industries in these areas? There are entrepreneurs that are heavily subsidized by in the United States by the government. Why not do the same here in Europe? And we also need to make sure that we can also deviate from free trade when it comes to key certain sectors. We need to also focus on green technology too. This is the only thing that will help us to respond when it comes to subsidies in China and in the US. There are two sectors in particular that need our support: energy and agriculture. Energy, because it's perhaps the one where we have reformed the most, and that's where we really need to make the most far-reaching changes in the future. We need to make sure that we have an Europe of the atom, let's say. If we go back to 1957, we see that was when the policy was developed, but there are major shortcomings in this policy. We have problems when it comes to competitiveness. And we know that when it comes to our social model, there are limits. But we have real issues when it comes to energy, because we depend on other regions, and we do not have our own hydrocarbons. If we can change that, we will become more competitive. So decarbonized energy produced in Europe will be the key. That will help with the social model and with employment. We need to deploy renewable energy, and we need to focus on nuclear energy too. This will help us to be a real superpower when it comes to electricity. We have committed errors in recent years by already starting to fragment the hydrogen and the electricity sectors. We need to make sure that decarbonized electricity can benefit from freedom of movement in Europe. We know how to produce decarbonized electrons, and that is a real opportunity, because that avoids using the carbon-based electrons, and it also stops us having to import. So we need to make sure that we can have more renewable and nuclear capacity. There are around 15 member states that are involved in this, and we need to make sure that we can invest in greater interconnectivity between our new electricity systems, grids. That will help us to have visibility, and it will also help us to guarantee energy supplies that are low cost and produced in Europe, and not with carbon. Another strategic sector is agriculture. We've spoken a lot about this, often in a very defensive manner due to some of the anger amongst our farmers. But we know that Europe gives 10 billion euros of subsidies to its farmers. So are farmers necessarily angry against Europe? Maybe it is anger against the complex systems, the over-regulation, some of the standards in place, badly implemented laws at French level and also at European level. So we need to make sure that there is a roadmap. We know that 3/4 of it has already been set up, but we need to be able to better support our farmers. But Europe is absolutely key when it comes to agricultural policies. Again, it's a question of sovereignty. During COVID, who would be stupid enough to delegate their food needs to someone else? We've started trying to fix some of the damage that's been done. When it comes to animal proteins, for example, we delegated this to other continents. But we absolutely need to make sure that we have our own food sovereignty. We see that farmers will always see themselves as a kind of the variable when it comes to free trade. It's always done on their with them as the ones that suffers. But we should not be having to depend on other countries. Imagine when you no longer can rely on Europe for your needs in terms of vegetables or in terms of food in general. Well, good luck to you. We thought that these kinds of foodstuffs and commodities would simply just continue to be flowing freely without any kind of strategy. So we need a common agricultural policy that is not as complex. It needs to be strong, but not as complex. We also need to look at supporting our fishermen. We need to make sure that we have sustainable policies. We also need to make the most of technology when it comes to this sector. We need to modernize and use technology well in this area when we need to. But we need to defend this sector. We need to have a strong policy. Give better and more information to consumers. Also have to look at the environmental impact of farming practices, but also signal the loyal actions at a European level. We need to make sure that there are European controls. We need to make sure that there are strong customs practices in place. We need to make sure that if anything is imported from outside of Europe, then producers in those countries respect the same rules that we have to respect in Europe. All of this is at the heart of a very ambitious agricultural policy in Europe. We also need to review our trade policies. This is another element of prosperity in Europe. This is going to have to be very far-reaching. Yes, we can open up our trade, but we also have to defend our interests. We can't be the only ones who respect the WTO rules in the world. If the US and China don't respect these rules, then, and we're the only ones that do, then what's going to happen to us? And again, we are too naive in this area. We have 450 million people in our market. It's a huge asset for us. We need to protect the health of our citizens and the health standards. We need to implement and defend our social standards and also our environmental standards as well. Otherwise, we're going to invent a continent which will over-oblige producers in its own territories. However, when products come from elsewhere, it's like we're looking the other way. So we will have no more producers conform to our own. We will have no more farmers, let's say, that will be able to deal with what we are asking them to conform to in Europe, and everything will come from outside of Europe. We know about the trade agreement set up with Canada. I mention this because we cannot be too demagogic when it comes to this. I've heard some debates in France in recent weeks. We can't just reject all free trade. Good luck to you if you do. Some people say to us that trade is bad. Well, go and explain to all of the farmers who are actually benefiting from the free trade agreement with Canada. This is because we put in place certain clauses. It's a new kind of free trade agreement which allows our dairy farmers, those who produce dairy products, to actually export to Canada, but also to protect us from any producers elsewhere who do not want to respect our standards. But we're not against closing off our borders. We're not against complete protectionism. That would be shooting ourselves in the foot.
Les accords de commerce modernes et justes
modern and fair trade agreements that respect the Paris agreements when it comes to the environment, and also focusing on certain sensitive agricultural products, show that all of this is what we need to really take into account. For example, when you look at our dealings with Mercosur in this area, we need to make sure that we have these mirror clauses, that these reciprocal clauses in our trade agreements. And we need to review the standards that currently exist. We also need to make sure that everyone knows the carbon footprint of different products and that consumers know. So that way they know that the made in Europe products are almost always systematically better for the environment than those that come from elsewhere. And if not, then these products should not be able to enter European soil. We need to make sure that we have clear controls, and this is the only way to make our trade credible, and the only way to defend our borders and our producers. Otherwise, there will be mass disindustrialization. We also need to strengthen our economic security tools. I spoke to Mr. Rutte about this at The Hague. Security when it comes to employment, when it comes to our businesses, better protect intellectual property, making sure that we can invest in certain sensitive areas, protect ourselves from physical attacks against certain areas. Economic security is also at the heart of these new trade policies. A fifth element of our prosperity is fighting for innovation and research. First and foremost, we should be obsessed with productivity. And to do so, we need to be able to innovate and to carry out research. We already are, for many of our countries, such a power. However, we need to make sure that we train more talent and we can retain talent here in Europe and avoid a brain drain. We know that there is competition from America and from China. Therefore, we need to make sure that 3% of European GDP is dedicated to research. We are making efforts here in France in this area, but we also need to make more when it comes to public investment for public research projects, but also private research. It's absolutely key for this prosperity pact. The Horizon Europe programme needs to be strengthened, focusing on the most effective programmes, notably the European Council of Research. We need to be ready to take certain risks. The council that exists, the Research Council, has been working in this direction. But we need to make sure that we have the best scientific teams in order to carry our ambitions. It's absolutely key. We need to make sure that we are a continent that is investing in disruptive, innovative solutions. That's how quantum computers, electronic chips, and all of these different types of technology will be able to put Europe back on the research and innovation map in the world. And we need to be able to respond to this, also to some of the health issues that we have in Europe. We need to make sure that we have a European plan for research and development fighting against cancer, Alzheimer's and degenerative diseases. In these areas, we are really a breeding ground for reinvestment. And the key is training and being able to attract talent and retain talent. I've spoken a lot about raw materials, but perhaps more than today, resources, one of the rarest resources will be talent. Especially that's why higher education is absolutely vital for Europe. And we need to make sure that we have strong startups. With the Scale Up Europe programme, we've done this so that we can become a continent of innovation.
And that is part of the Prosperity Pact. And it's related to the ability to invest. Well, that's money, yes. Today in Europe, we have rules which are no longer adapted, because if we take defense and security and artificial intelligence, decarbonization, we have a wall of a ceiling of investment. And when all the figures are aligned, I read all the reports and I read what Commission wrote, what Mr. Draghi wrote, and there's a consensus which is it takes between 650 to a billion more every year to achieve all that. And we can't wait. We have to get that money and invest. We can't wait for our security. We don't want to cry over spilt milk. We want to make all those investments now. And it's now in this decade that it needs to happen. We're already late compared to the United States and to China. This massive investment means that we have to change our collective rules. There's something that I think is a part of the past. We need to invest with a different set of financial rules. Decarbonization is an element. We need to raise our debate so as to include all these objectives within the actions of the European Central Bank. We need to combine all these absolutely essential objectives. We need to increase our investment capability. As I said, we need hundreds of billions of euros of investment a year. And compared to what we've been doing, it was depending on national flexibilities. But that is not the sort of answer that we can live with. We need a common capacity, and we need a common broad investment plan. We need subventions. I cannot prejudge of what will happen, but how will we do it? Will we do a common loan plan, or whichever way, we need to double our financial capability, at least double it. Our budget needs to be twice as strong. We need the shock of public investment. It means once again, we have to talk about the own resources of the Union. I am in favor of having more Union equity without it weighing on the European citizens for all these aims: decarbonization, taxation of corporate tax, use new resources that we need to find. There are many ways of creating own resources that we need to explore. There's a common budget policy, there's a financial policy. To be able to raise all this extra money, we need to appeal to private investment. Our Europe has two main, or even three main defaults, and we accumulate our savings, and we need to be able to use them and invest these savings. Secondly, we're not risk takers. We have an economy which is with a lot of intermediates, with insurances and banks, and no direct action. Thirdly, our savings, 300 billion a year, is not channeled the right way. And as we know, even with the Americans and their financial appeal, it's all not channeled the right way. We need to be able to create elements of solidarity so that our investment funds and all our actors on the stock exchange and in the world of finance work together in a structured way. We've already given ourselves 12 months to reach this united system. We've talked about it so long, with common rules for failed companies, for whatever, so that we do as well in that area as we did for bank supervision. And we did it also for competition. We need more flexible systems, and there are many technical solutions. We need this financial union so that capitals move around and the flow is good. And we need to work on solvency. We can't be if the Americans who were the cause of the 2008 crisis don't even apply the rule, really don't want us to go on being financially irresponsible. But I think we need to be a bit more risk takers. Otherwise, we won't have good research and innovation. We need to encourage our startups, and I'm also for us in favour of us finding European solutions for our savings. A real single market, a real market for investments, European financial products to avoid our capitals going elsewhere. We need a new growth and prosperity model that means simplification, decarbonization, a deep change of our competitive industrial policy, to have a real research and innovation policy, and to change our monetary and budgetary and financial system. As a conclusion, why do we want to do all that? As I was saying at the beginning, Europe could die if it doesn't keep its borders, apply security, if it depends on the others for production. It's now at a point where it could even just die of itself. After, as Peter Zutterdijk said in the conferences which he's giving at the Collège de France, he's a bit ironically pessimistic, and he said that there are times when Europe is full of doubts and on the decline and doesn't love itself, has no self-esteem. We owe it so much, so why not? Why? It would be too long to go into this and explain why Europe is the continent of doubts and doubting itself. Maybe because there's a culture of self-deprecation, and maybe because we're in a system of challenged democracies and of deep concern about the future. The risk for Europe is to get used to this depreciation. And that's why today I want to offer the promise of defending the European humanism. If we want to go on being a strong continent, it's because we're not like the others. Let's not forget that. We're not like the others. Camus had a wonderful quote, "Our Europe is a common adventure which we are doing in spite of you." And that's it. It's an adventure which we're still carrying out in spite of you, of the people, and in a spirit of intelligence. From the Baltic to the Mediterranean and to the Black Sea, we're trying to defend a vision of mankind and of enlightenment. And from Paris to Warsaw and Lisbon to Odessa, we have a unique relationship to freedom and justice. And man is always at the center. That since the Renaissance and Enlightenment until now, it's the choice which is ours. And in that, we are different from other parts of the world, where we don't want to delegate our lives to big industrial players. The European humanism means we don't want to delegate our life to state control and to loss of freedom. It's made for people who have thought and a desire for freedom, and it's a constant notion in traditions of permanence and modernity. That's the European imbalanced. This is what makes us different from the others, and I also want to plead in favor of this difference. And on a day that is so important today, I have my Portuguese friends in my mind 50 years after the revolution, and it's because they fought and they built. And since the beginning of this century, we mustn't consider that anything is already acquired, and we need to continue to defend what is a part and parcel of our states, our democratic states. And let's not forget that there's a loss of freedom even in the academic world, even in Europe. And this is why I would like to defend budgets in favor of state of law. And Europe is not just a window, a shopping window where we choose this or that. And that's why we need to reinforce our ability to combat interference. It's been denounced by some of our colleagues. We have a return on our territory, thanks to television, thanks to social networks, of a sort of a naive approach of our rules and of the problems of democratic civility. And there's a lot of false information, fake news, and we have to combat that too. And be truer, particularly when this happens at a time of elections. And now there are also reasons to be optimistic. When you think of Poland a few months ago, when people were saying, oh, everything is lost, not only they had the best participation in its history in a democratic vote, but there was a remarkable demonstration of freedom and democratic behavior. We need to defend those sort of things everywhere in Europe and spread it around. On the conference about the future of Europe, I defended citizen participation and the European Citizenship Initiative. Those are things which we must develop as Europeans. They are essential to give more impetus to the principle of Europe. And they are transnational lists, which are the possibility at the time of elections of holding elections with a proper European debate. The elections we have today, well, they are like national elections because we haven't built a national electoral lists. Unfortunately, the problem is that we have bodies which make decisions more and more, and democratic participation which hasn't grown since '79, and we need more to be more outward-looking, more action, and maybe move towards the qualified majority. That would be a useful reform for our foreign policy, and even if we could take it further, I won't do that today, and particularly to defend the European humanism is that we believe in a liberal democracy, but we need to forge Europe with on the basis of its citizens' knowledge.
There is nothing more important than being an individual with freedom of thought and capable of asking the right kinds of questions. Indeed, we have a responsibility in Europe to defend critical thinking, to also defend open science. Science that is shared with all. This combat is one that we also have at the international level, and we need to renew our tools in this fight. We have around 50 different universities, programs that have been created, and I thank all of the deans and students who have helped us to help circulate all of this knowledge. We also need to look at financing of these institutions and go towards European diplomas that are recognized across Europe. That's why we also need to make sure that 15% of people have actually gone on some kind of academic exchange via Erasmus by 2030. We need to also make sure that we have better digitalization, access to different works of art, for example, across Europe. We need to be able to have a common imagination and to be able to deploy this across Europe. We also need to have different platforms of reference, websites that offer all of the languages, that can touch all of Europe. We need to be able to promote our common heritage. We need to also be able to defend copyright in Europe and intellectual property. We need to transmit the European spirit to young generations. They need to be able to discover our continent, travel, speak with others beyond Erasmus. This can also be done in very concrete areas, as outlined in different reports, to be able to go anywhere in Europe by train. The Interrail Pass is extremely successful. It's not just about transport, but it's also a cultural project, so that students, young people, can go to different capitals around the world and countries around Europe. This is not a European invention. You know perhaps how much we like to boast about our own achievements, but it's actually an Italian invention. We tried to improve it and others followed suit, but now we need to generalize these kinds of measures. And here I'm speaking about the culture pass. So we have lots of ambitions when it comes to an intelligent, cultural Europe, but we also need to defend this in the times in which we live. Because here today we are in this university, in a physical place, physical space where we can speak with civility, we can speak to each other, share our points of view. However, our everyday lives are perhaps played out in different spaces, especially those of your children, teenagers, young people. Here, in Europe, we cannot control all of these spaces. I don't believe that we produce enough content. However, we don't even define the rules of these different spaces that young people are exposed to. It's an anthropological issue. It's a question of civilization. We have young people spending hours and hours in front of screens. Young people are actually being introduced to adult life, to private life, through screens. And when debates are taking place through these digital spaces, the majority of the time today, are we really going to delegate responsibility for these spaces to others? Well, no. I've told you it's a cultural fight. It's a question of civilization. It's a civilizational fight. And that's what's going to form our different public opinions, let's say. If people's minds are distorted due to actions taken elsewhere and control that comes from elsewhere, what kind of democracies are we going to have? So this isn't a technical issue. It's not about public policy only. It's about the ability to create a democratic, digital, public order. This is really an issue. This is really a matter of survival for us. It's the only way that we can defend our humanism, because you have two models, in fact. You have an Anglo-Saxon model, which delegates. By definition, delegates. Yes, we'll trust these big companies. They have their algorithms. They're very complicated, but we as consumers, we like this model. It seems efficient, effective to us. And this is a choice that actually puts the citizen in an inferior situation to those who are in control. And then you have another kind of system, which is where the state can take control of the situation. For example, that's what's done in China, but also in other states that are more authoritarian. We need to create another model, which creates a democratic order. It's transparent. We debate about the rules and then we make choices. That's why I want to defend Europe, which has a kind of age of digital consent at 15 years old. At 15 years old is when we should be able to access this digital space. Before that, there's all of these risks. Hate speech online. It can be. People should only be exposed to the internet after 15 years. Would anyone send their child into a jungle when they're 5 years old, 10 years old? Well, no. We accompany our children. We take them to school in the morning. We hand over responsibility for education to people who we trust. But then, several hours a day, we open the doors to the jungle, to cyberbullying, to pornographic content, paedophiles online. That's what happens, because there's no regulation. And there's no regulation, there's no moderation. Let's think about how many of these social networks actually have moderators in French, not even 10 of them, I would imagine. So we need to get back control of what our young people, our teenagers, are actually exposed to, and say that 15 years old is when they should be able to access the internet, not before. And we also need to be able to make sure that this digital space is more civilized. We already say in our societies you shouldn't be able to have hate crime, anti-Semitic crime. We fight against racism, but we don't do it online. Otherwise, there will be uninhibited hatred. This is a question of civilization. It's a question of democracy. It needs to be a battle that is waged here in Europe. And of course, our European humanism is also one about dignity and justice. We like freedom, of course. However, we are also big lovers of justice, equality. Again, this sets us apart from certain other regions of the world. Gender equality is at the heart of this project. We've done a lot in terms of this, between work-life balance, transparency when it comes to wages. However, I believe we need to go even further. Something that we have done in our constitution, for example, we have, we should inscribe in the fundamental rights of the European Union this idea of the right to abortion. This is really at the heart of what Europe is all about. This is also Europe that's built on social cohesion. True to the heritage of Jacques Delors, for helping those who are most in need, I propose that we create a European solidarity programme. This would be able to support national initiatives, able to help people in extremely precarious situations. Europe should also have new instruments to help people in terms of their social transitions. We need to have policies based on justice, social justice, and making sure that freedom of movement, accessibility, fighting against discrimination, all of this is actually a reality. And when we speak about justice, I'm not going to go into the whole debate here, the heated debate, when it comes to tax, because it's a good debate when we look at the accumulation of wealth. But it's not just a debate at the European level, but it's at the international level too, when it comes about this minimum tax. So in G20, alongside President Lula, we spoke about this idea of tax. And indeed, this is something that we really need to continue to push forward. This kind of European humanism, this certain idea of Europe, is made of things that are very sensitive. This idea of freedoms, the rule of law, wanting to make sure that knowledge and culture are things that are precious to us. This is Europe. The Europe that we see in our cafes and restaurants, in our capitals, and it's about the heritage that we want to transmit. That's why Europe is always caught in these tensions, but it has its word to say. Defending our culture, transmitting our culture to future generations, and defending the uniqueness, let's say, of dialogue between universities. However, we also are characterized by being a little corner of the earth that wants to protect its landscapes. Think about our forests, our seas, our oceans. It's not just some kind of modernist idea that wants to turn everything into an environmental issue. No, but let's protect our forests, let's protect our biodiversity, let's protect our seas, our oceans. It's just about thinking that we know here in Europe how to count to 3. 1, 2, 3, for example. What about future generations? We have inherited a heritage. Do we want to hand that heritage on to future generations? And we can't do that if we are going to deplete our natural resources that cannot be replaced. Protection of our forests, our oceans, And in everything that we want to develop in our policies, there needs to be humanism at the heart of it. Because I'm not one of those people who believe that nature has a kind of superior right to people. But it's actually something that's integral to our lives. It makes us humanists. Ladies and gentlemen, I know I've spoken for too long, but there were many other things that I could say. However, I don't believe that anyone would be able to say, well, some people would say that I haven't spoken enough about Africa or some of our treaty reforms and all the other things that I wasn't able to say. But Europe is a conversation that never ends. And it's a project that has no limits, let's say. From a philosophical point of view, let's never forget that Europe is built by Greece, let's say, based on even Oriental philosophy. And indeed, we can even wonder, what is a nation? What does Europe want to become? You will have understood that this is a decisive moment. This is a turning point. Our Europe can die. So many things have been done in these last decades. We have won so many different battles. And there's no other nation that says it wants to leave the European Union or the Euro. However, we have become accustomed to this kind of yes, but vision. Yes, I will take everything that Europe has given to me, but I'll simplify it, or I'll do it without respecting the rules or some of the fundamental values. So it's not like I'm asking you to. So it's not like, imagine if you live in a flat and you say, well, I'm no longer going to pay my rent, for example. Of
course they're strong. It's normal. People are angry. We're going through many shocks. And our citizens feel that, we could die. But the answer is not to be timid, it's to be active. It's not to just say, oh yeah, things are bad. We have a choice, and the British are going to choose the 9th this year, the 9th of June. We're going to choose as well. But choosing is not just to do the same thing as before. It's to be responsible facing a new situation and be innovative. I know that according to Voltaire, it's a bit difficult to do, but we have to be optimistic and show the will. I think we can take hold of our destiny with power, prosperity and humanism of our Europe. And during these uncertain times, to quote Hannah Arendt, the condition of the modern man, the best way to know the future when events come back and when the unpredictable has happened. The best way to know the future is to make promises and to hold them. So what I suggest is that after we've taken this look at things, we make promises and we fight to hold the promises for our future. Maybe then we'll have a bit of a chance and we will have fought for our future. Long live Europe, the Republic and France.
French President Emmanuel Macron there speaking at Sorbonne University, giving a roadmap for Europe in the run-up to the European Parliament elections that are due to take place in early June. Armin Georgian, our European Affairs editor, is with me on set to debrief this long speech. It was over an hour and a half long. We do know that Emmanuel Macron likes to give long speeches and to cover many topics, and of course the main topic, one of his main topics, was Europe and the way that it's run. Tell us, what does he want for Europe? What is Macron's vision for Europe going forward?
I mean, in a sentence, I suppose, Shona, it's about a more self-reliant Europe. One of the slogans that they showed on the wall, actually, we can still see it there, I think. Une Europe puissance is Europe as a power, So it's slight nuance there, because it could have said a powerful Europe, une Europe puissante, but it's actually Europe as a power. So I think that was sort of the key thread, I suppose, running through this hour and a half or more of speech, that Europe should not be shy about its place in the world, about the power that it can project. But obviously, in order to do that, it has to continue with a lot of reforms internally in the European Union. So,
I mean, his last great speech, I should say long speech, and not use the word great, was in 2017. He gave a similar speech about what he wanted for Europe. And actually, since then, a number of those ideas have been implemented at European level. Policies like, for example, joint debt, the idea of having joint debt, which was long a taboo for Germany, notably, or even having a carbon tax on non-EU countries. He's also calling on kind of the implementation of very specific policies at the European level.
Yeah, we do have to go back to 2017, because that's when he first really explained this whole agenda for Europe, which he calls a more autonomous Europe. I suppose, we'd have to translate that a bit differently in English as, reliant on itself, more independent.
Self-reliant.
Self-reliant, yeah. So one of the key aspects of that is obviously the whole competition with China and the US. He alluded to that in the speech when he used the word naivety, which is something that the French government has used for the last few years, and basically Europe should stop being naive. It should stop being taken advantage of by other actors. And what that really means is, well, to give you one concrete example, Shona, the whole Chinese subsidies for their solar panels, which has led to unfair competition with the European equivalent industry, just as Europe is trying to do this whole energy transition away from fossil fuels and so forth. So
and part of the reason for that,
alluded to here,
for that competition, for that problem with competition, is that Macron, we saw in his speech, he's accusing China, but also the United States, of not playing by the rules. Does this mean that he's also calling for Europe to become more protectionist in its policies?
I think he's always been a bit cagey about the whole sort of protectionism thing. I mean, he's quite careful. He says there should be obviously an investigation if any sort of unfair practices are found, but all these things are quite slow moving. I mean, the case of the Chinese solar panel story, that's still the probe, I think, is still ongoing. But I mean, one of the sort of key phrases, I think, was Europe is mortal, it can die, but it doesn't have to die. It's up to our choices as Europeans. So this whole idea throughout this whole speech was that you got the sort of sense that he thinks Europe is at a turning point, and that it can either continue to build on all this strategic autonomy, like you mentioned, the joint debt that was issued after COVID, the joint procurement of vaccines, joint procurement of weapons for Ukraine, all these joint things that Europe has kind of started on this path since COVID, really, and Ukraine accelerated some of those tendencies, it can either continue that way or it can sort of fall back onto something more amorphous where Europe doesn't have a real sense of
More
itself.
national, really.
Yeah, perhaps more national. Maybe this was a kind of veiled, very veiled, or I don't know how you would say it, but I wondered if that was this idea of Europe doesn't have to die, but it is mortal. I don't know if he was kind of sending a message there very indirectly, because he can't openly make a campaign speech, right, in this context, but whether that was a kind of an indirect way of saying, if you vote for parties that don't want joint European project, that just want national project, national
You're voting against
sovereignty,
Europe, in a sense.
yeah, then
Right.
you're not going to be able to then build on, as he would see it, the successes of Europe since 2020, since the joint responses to the pandemic, and now all the joint defense initiatives that
Right.
are still going on.
Yeah, we have a lot to say about everything that he said. He said a lot of things, of course, about the European defense mechanisms and systems, which are really interesting. But I think I would like, this is our last question, because we do have to move on. We have been on this story for a very long time now. I do think it's important to kind of remind viewers about the context of this speech. Of course, it's coming before the European elections, but it's also coming about 3 years before the end of his second and last term. He's also in a place of on a defensive footing, even at home with politics, right? The far right of Marine Le Pen, the National Rally, ahead of him in the polls. His party no longer has a majority in parliament. I mean, what is his message also for French people when he talks about?
So he is in a tight spot with the opinion polls. If you look at the results of the last European elections in 2019, that was a kind of a shock for his party. The fact that the far right National Rally pushed past him into first place in 2019, but not by much. Look at the difference in just 5 years shown. And now, if you look at the polls, we haven't had the election yet, it's on June the 9th, but the same National Rally is on, if you look at the aggregate of polls, I just checked it today, 30%, and Renaissance Macron's party on just over 17%. So a massive gap between
More than 10
those
points.
two, much bigger than in the 2019 election. So what does that tell you about disenchantment with his brand of policy, possibly disenchantment with what he wants to do in Europe as well? There might be an element of a protest vote there. There usually is with parties that are on the far right or the far left, but it's still not a good place for him to be just a few weeks before that June the 9th election.
And he's hoping that the speech like this one will help invigorate his base and call people back to him.
But I don't know what you thought about it, but I think the kind of language he was using was kind of, in a sense, preaching to the converted. I don't know whether young people who are not planning to vote in the European election
Are they going to change their mind after this speech?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Armin Georgian there, our European Affairs editor, with a debrief of Macron's speech.